rather than talking about illegal immigration. That will help in a primary, I think. But in general elections, Paul, this fall, it could be very harmful to a Democratic Party that is still trailing President Trump and the Republicans on most key issues like the economy and, yes, immigration.
All right. So what are you seeing elsewhere in primaries for the House?
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Are you seeing this kind of trend where there's a lot of Democratic challengers from the left? I mean, is Bernie Sanders really handpicking these candidates, and they're likely to kind of more of them sweep into victory in the primaries?
I think that might be a bit of an overstatement, but we are seeing in a number of key House and Senate races, I think of the main race in particular, where the popular governor, who is, I think, 78, Janet Mills, is being challenged by a lobster fisherman who is very competitive with her in the polls. And we're seeing similar challenges in Minnesota, other states. And I think where you started is the problem. The energy and the enthusiasm is with you.
So let me get right to it, because there's a lot going on here, folks. And I want to say good evening or good day, everybody. I am Charles Nolen, and tonight we're devoting our full segment to a crisis that erupted just hours ago: the partial shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. Funding for the department lapsed at 12:01 a.m. this morning, Saturday, February 14, 2026, after intense negotiations between the White House, congressional Republicans, and Senate Democrats broke down with no agreement in sight. This isn't a full government shutdown like a record 43-day one we saw last fall. Instead, it's narrowly targeted at DHS, the sprawling agency with over 260,000 employees responsible for everything from border security and immigration enforcement to disaster response, airport screening, and cybersecurity. Yes, they handle the president's security, the Secret Service, as well. Our goal tonight is to break this down clearly, explain what happened, lay out the core demands from both sides in real context from recent events and past compromises, explore the real-world impacts already unfolding, and propose a realistic path forward to resolve this issue so essential services can resume without further strain. Let's start with the timeline and immediate trigger. Congress had been working toward full-year funding for most of the government, but DHS was left on a short 2-week extension that expired last night. Lawmakers recessed for the week without a deal, and they're not due back until February 23rd, meaning this could stretch at least 10 days unless a breakthrough comes sooner through ongoing White House talks or an emergency session. This marks the third funding disruption involving DHS in recent months, following a brief 4-day partial lapse earlier this year and the longer fall shutdown. The root cause traces back to deep divisions over immigration enforcement reforms, intensified by tragic incidents last month in Minneapolis. Federal agents, likely from ICE or CBP, fatally shot 2 American citizens, Alex Pretty and Renee Good, during what reports describe as an operation tied to anti-ICE demonstrations or enforcement actions. These deaths sparked widespread outrage protests and renewed scrutiny on tactics like warrantless entries, masked agents, and the use of force. Democrats have seized on this to demand accountability measures before approving more funding, arguing that without them, we risk more unnecessary violence and an erosion of public trust. On the Democratic side, leaders like Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries have outlined a set of about 10 specific demands aimed at bringing ICE and CBP practices more in line with the standard law enforcement protocols nationwide. Key among them, nationwide rollout of body-worn cameras for all field officers to provide transparency and evidence in use of force incidents, requiring agents to clearly display identification. No more masked or anonymous operations, which critics say makes accountability impossible and heightens tensions. Stricter judicial oversight, such as requiring warrants for most home entries or warrantless actions in non-emergency situations. Limits on roving patrols and aggressive tactics that some see as overreach. Democrats frame this not as halting enforcement, but as ensuring fairness and due process for everyone, citizen or not. They point out that these ideas aren't radical, and many mirror policies already in place for local police departments. And there's a proceeding after similar tensions in Texas Border District last fall. A bipartisan pilot program equipped agents with body cameras, which helped reduce complaints and de-escalate situations without compromising operations. In response to the Minneapolis shootings specifically, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem moved quickly earlier this month, announcing immediate deployment of body cameras to every field officer in that area, with plans to expand nationwide as funding becomes available. That's a step in the right direction and shows some common ground exists. Republicans, led by figures in the House Homeland Security and Appropriations Committees, counter that these reforms especially added procedural hurdles like mandatory warrants or unmasking could dangerously slow agents in high-risk environments. They argue it ties the hands of frontline personnel at a time when threats remain real. For instance, Border Patrol officials have reported spikes in drug trafficking along less monitored routes in states like Arizona just last month, where quick action is critical to intercept fentanyl and other dangers. Republicans worry that layering on bureaucracy could let dangerous individuals or contraband slip through, endangering communities. They also highlight past successes with targeted limited pilots. In Florida last year, during averted shutdown talks, both parties agreed to a program allowing faster judicial review in certain urgent cases while preserving emergency exceptions. That approach maintains safety without fully sacrificing due process, proving that flexibility is possible. What about the practical impacts right now? This is a partial shutdown, so effects vary widely. Approximately 90% of DHS employees, many in critical roles, are considered essential and will continue working, though most will not be paid until funding resumes. Immigration enforcement through ICE and CBP is among the least disrupted because last year's major legislation, often called the Big Beautiful Bill, provided tens of billions in separate multi-year funding, around $75 billion combined for those agencies. So operations like deportations, border patrols, and interior enforcement largely continue. But other parts feel the pinch. TSA, airport screeners, will keep staffing checkpoints. Travelers should see minimal changes, though longer lines are possible if morale dips or absences rise from unpaid work. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, disaster response remains active, but funding strains could delay reimbursements or new preparations. Critical in places like Florida, where hurricane season planning is always underway. Coast Guard missions, Secret Service protection, and cybersecurity efforts continue, but with payroll uncertainty for non-exempt staff. Overall, furloughs hit only about 8 to 10% of the workforce, but repeated disruptions erode morale and long-term readiness. Both sides have valid points rooted in real events, and history shows small, phased compromises have worked before. The Texas body camera pilot diffused tensions without halting enforcement. The Florida judicial review pilot balanced speed and oversight. So here's a practical way forward that builds on those successes and could get us moving in days rather than weeks. 1. Immediate agreement on the least controversial items. Expand body cameras nationwide, leveraging Secretary Noem's Minneapolis rollout as a model, and require clear officer identification. These build trust, provide evidence for investigations, and enjoy bipartisan support. Democrats want them, and the administration has already started implementing in key areas. 2. For thornier issues like warrant requirements and limits on certain tactics, phase them in with measured timeliness, say 60 to 90 days for a review process or pilot expansions. This gives time to test impacts on safety without immediate gridlock. 3. Pass a short-term continuing resolution, perhaps 2 to 4 weeks, to restart full pay operations while detailed talks continue. This avoids prolonging hardship for TSA, FEMA, and Coast Guard workers. 4. Build in oversight. Use existing bipartisan mechanisms like joint congressional review or independent audits of pilots to ensure reforms enhance both fairness and effectiveness. We've seen this kind of incremental progress work in the past, and with public pressure mounting, especially from affected communities, frontline workers, and travelers, there's incentive for both sides to meet halfway. This crisis affects every American. Our borders, our airports, our disaster readiness, and our sense of fairness in law enforcement. Tonight, I urge lawmakers, the administration, and all you watching to stay engaged, demand transparency, and push for that balanced solution. We can protect national security while upholding the rule of law. I'll keep you updated as developments unfold, whether it's progress in talks, impact here in Cape Coral, Florida, or anywhere across Florida, that's where I'm from, or any movement when Congress returns, anywhere. Thank you for joining me. Stay informed, stay safe, and have a happy Valentine's Day. And make sure the person that's your Valentine knows that you really care and love them. Happy Valentine's Day, folks. I'm really glad that you're here. Have a great day.
Thank you for watching a Top Hat production.
Ohano ohil, salaweto, ahund vashmeo, nith kadesh moch. Tithe man kufach Nihoe sobionach Ekenet washmeo Of bara Aplam lachman disukonam yomana Washboklan Albein كان الطوف حنان شبكين لحلبين التقلان إلا فصلان من بشا مدول دلاكي مالكوتا هايلا ودجبوتا ليولا نالمين آمين